I personally began my self-love journey only 4 or 5 years ago. And I learned it
I've
from
just started, I'll be honest. I mean, yes, self-love. We just don't care about ourselves. I
we,
agree. I
we,
think
we don't know
50 has
how to.
initiated something great in.
Absolutely, absolutely. And self-love is an integral part of some types of leadership. For example, if you aim for political leadership, you know that the journey or even the journey to being a very CEO of a large organization, you know that the day is going to bring so much battering. You know the day is going to bring so many challenges. If you do not have that core of
Sorry
self-love
for
within you,
interruption. We are now live on YouTube. There's some technical issue that we couldn't go live on Facebook. Now we are live on Woman Innovator official YouTube channel. So over to you, ma'am.
thank you. Are we going to try again on Facebook and continue to try? Tripti,
No,
you're muted.
actually we are done trying on Facebook now.
Okay. Tripti, you're muted.
So welcome, Meeta ma'am. We are live on YouTube, and I really am pleased to have you today with us. I would like to quickly introduce Meeta ma'am. She is a mentor for me, and she's a board member of Women Innovator. And a Women Innovator is a virtual incubator for women, wherein we are working with women entrepreneur professionals, social activists to support them and help them in their journey to move forward. With this, I welcome once again Meeta Sengupta ma'am. She works at the CAPS of policy and practice across education and skill spectrum and enjoys sharing her gleanings by her writings for a wider audience. She has been an investment banker, a researcher, an editor, a teacher, and a school leader across continents. A keen observer of how economics, foreign policies, and investment affect the policy, and then practice of education. She works with leaders to design intervention that improve the quality and process of education, and designing education processes to realize the potential of individual students is at the center of her education philosophy. Ma'am has worked both as a policy observer and at the coalface of education in various roles across country. And she has served as a governor of an aided school, part of the management committee of residential school, managed an academic center, and so on. She has worked with children's, teenagers, business schools, and PhD candidates. And she has also worked with those seeking to rebuild their lives by education. So with this, she is a founder of the Center for Education Strategy, a Delhi-based think tank that builds bridges between policy and practice for educators, educationists, and institutions. And she's been a special advisor to many organizations like FICCI. She's a member for education expert on NISA, National Independent School Alliance, and that represent over 6,000 budget schools. And with this, I would request Meeta ma'am to start her session and tell us about about what she feels about the current scenarios and how to lead in these current times. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Thank you ever so much, Tripti. That was a very long introduction. But I have to say, I am grateful that I've had many opportunities to serve and to build small and big institutions. And I've had the opportunity to work with great people in small positions and small people in great positions as well. And each of them has been a learning experience. I'm just hoping to share some part of that with all of you today. If I understand it correctly, Tripti has asked me to speak for 15 to 20 minutes. Now that I advise teachers and we're going on to online learning, I honestly do believe that 20 minutes might be a little bit too long for this format, for the media. And one that's actually, that brings us directly, does it not, to the kind of challenges that we are facing today. We are not living in normal times. There is nothing normal about what is happening around us right now. And what is normal has gone. As the philosophers say, you can never enter the same river twice. It's not the same river. If you step out of the river, if you step out of that normal, and then you want to step back into the normal, it's not going to be the same normal situation, which makes it a personal challenge for each one of us. And the only way that each one of us is going to win this challenge is to call within ourselves, call all the resources that we have within ourselves to be able to make this leap into a new normal. COVID has come as a tragedy for the entire world, but COVID has also come as a catalyst. So you will notice around you things that we had expected to happen over 10 to 20 years. For example, schools and colleges going online. We had expected this to happen over the next decade or so. That's happening now. That happened within 2 weeks. Things we expected industries to perform in specific ways and take their time. For example, AI. We've been talking about AI, and everybody said AI is not ready for the real world yet. And now suddenly we're talking about online tracking to track our very health, to predict our behaviors for the future. Things have changed. That it's as simple as that. And when things change, we must change as well. But how much do we change? And what gives us strength to be able to make that change happen is, I think, the question that we are charged with today. And I think managing change is an act of leadership. It is the job of leaders to manage change. And as a leader, actually, let me pause here and ask you. I'm going to ask you, Tripti, because you were on the screen with me before. But the question goes out to everybody as a thought question. Where do you, and very, very briefly, it's not a deep question, where do we see examples of great leadership? A couple of examples of great leadership.
So, ma'am, I feel at this time, leadership also would mean carrying on what you have in hand.
Yes.
Carrying that community and existing roles smoothly, because at this moment you would not only lose your
Orientation.
yes, because even carrying on and running what you have in hand is also pretty challenging, because you're sitting in the same place, you're surrounded with your other those duties which you may be avoiding because you were outside working at office. Thinking from all those perspectives, just carrying on what you have in hand and carrying on continually and not losing yourself is, I think, is one very important aspect, I feel, of leadership at the moment.
Absolutely. And where do we see this happening? We see this happening across countries. We just before the session started, Simi Puri, thank you very much for that. One of our esteemed participants here spoke about some countries demonstrating amazing leadership. And often the leaders who have received kudos have been women leaders. And we were beginning to explore the personal journey of women that makes them such great leaders of countries. We see great leadership in corporates. We see great leadership in sports, for example. When we look to leadership, we look to these big and grand examples of leadership. But I think in these changing times, there is something that is more important than grand leadership. And maybe it's actually even for the grand leaders. It's the journey within to personal leadership that is much, much more sustainable, much, much more important. And this is the journey within that will guide us to land our ship literally safely. we are, if we were to visualize ourselves as a boat that is passing through a storm, it is our job then as a leader to land this boat, to bring it to safe harbor. And to do that, we need to be able to access elements of our internal leadership. And when do we see, I'm just talking about the visible right now, when do we see this kind of leadership, the internal leadership? We see it in times of crisis, like right now. In your local community, you would have seen somebody who was able to step up and organize food for the needy people around you in the local community. That's leadership that's demonstrated. You would have seen uh, uh, companies, for example, who suddenly realized that their soaps and their detergents, essential tools in the fight for against this virus, could not go through because all supply chains were shut down, shops were shut down. Now that kind of crisis demonstrated a whole new kind of strength, a whole new kind of leadership. We find internal leadership, personal leadership demonstrated in times of opportunity as well. We've seen high growth opportunities. Even this crisis, it's a great opportunity for industries that are in health technology, for example. Uh, this is an opportunity for them to step up. So personal leadership has these characteristics, right? Where you say you deliver, you step up. Components, as we talk, we are also listing the components of personal leadership. What is it within you? Tripta, you already spoke about holding still. For me, in fact, a very core definition of personal leadership is the ability to stand still and therefore strong for others when things around you are all chaotic. Leadership is often just the ability to stand still and yet enable progress. And that, I think, is different from the grand definitions of leadership that we have seen before. The grand definitions of leadership were all about creating fantastic growth, were about speed, were about doing things faster, better, stronger. Here we are saying yes, but not necessarily now. The time dimension of leadership has changed right now. Everyday leadership, leadership in every decision that we take, leadership taken not because we want to influence our followers, but leadership taken from deep conviction within us, from the values that we hold dear within us. Those are the elements of personal leadership. So I would actually like to take a few, just to structure this a little bit better. I would like to highlight 5 elements, all of them starting with the letter C. So 5 C's of personal leadership that I think are going to hold us true to ourselves and true to our value and vision of ourselves in these critical times. The first one is care. The first duty of a leader is the duty of care. Communication is a subset of care. Communication is how you demonstrate your care. But sometimes you communicate in words. And I know there are many influencers in our Women Innovator community who have been using words to demonstrate care to their community. They have been putting up motivational videos. Some have been singing songs, creating demonstrations of their talents. But there are other ways of demonstrating care, making sure that food has been delivered to the migrants who are walking is an act of care. It is also an act of organization. But the root of it is the deeply held value that I am a strong person. I can take this up. I can take this up, and I believe that care is my first duty. Those factories, for example, where a duty of care was demonstrated to workers, we've heard of examples from all over the world. Workers said, "Sir, we are not leaving you here." They said that to the owners and to the factory managers. "We know that if we leave, your factory will not be able to work. Now, that doesn't happen suddenly with one demonstration of care. That is the second C, the most important C in my book, but not necessarily equally important in everybody's book. So calibrate it as you will. The second C is consistency. Whatever you do, you must demonstrate internal consistency. As mothers or as people in charge, sometimes as people in charge of little children, you will notice that sometimes when a child cries, we scold a child, and sometimes when a child cries, we pet a child. Is that demonstrating consistency? At office, when somebody comes into your office, sometimes you're irritated and you speak in a very rough tone. At other times, just because you're not irritated, you speak in a kinder tone. Is that consistency? It's not. A lack of consistency is a lack of leadership. Your internal problems, your internal moods are your internal business, your personal business. You as a leader must demonstrate consistency in your behaviors, in your attitudes, in your values, in everything that you do. Because consistency is the base of authenticity. And authenticity is the basis of trust. And trust is the basis of being able to work together. Building followership, building the community comes from consistency. So the third C is that of community. There is no leader without followers, they say. But that's not necessarily true when we talk about personal leadership. Personal leadership, again, is an internal journey. The external followership will always manifest itself. If you have strong internal connectivity with your own community. So who is your community? Who are your communities? Yes, your family is your community. Your workers are your community. Your neighborhood is your community. The sisterhood of women entrepreneurs is certainly your community. As we see over here, we share this. Define your communities well and make sure that you remember to nurture communities. These are communities of care. These are communities that will build progress. Because of course, the first and only job of a leader is to create progress. Whether you're creating emotional progress, whether you're creating commercial progress, whether you're creating societal progress, it doesn't matter what kind of what your job as a leader is. But in each case, it is the job of creating progress, and you cannot do it alone. Let's be humble over here and realize that no one leader can ever do it alone. It is the bonding that we create as a community that will create any progress that we all want. The fourth C is that of commitment. Without commitment, there is nothing that binds you either to be consistent or to serve your community. There is nothing that actually tells you that you're going to continue to care. So the first three C's of care, community, and consistency cannot work without commitment. Your genuine commitment. I actually happen to, I normally don't go and visit Sadhu Maharajas, etc. But I actually happened to walk into the Ramakrishna mission, and I must give the Swamiji huge credit for this. Because I was sitting there and telling him about a story, and I was saying, I've been on television, 3 television shows in the past two or 3 days, and now suddenly I'm getting a lot of attention. And after about 5 or 6 days, and even 1 month later, nobody is going to pay attention to me. And I was laughing at myself, and he was laughing at me because, of course, he's been on television many times before. He knows this game of popularity coming and popularity going. Now, a true leader doesn't get shaken by popularity coming and going. Popularity is not leadership. Leadership is not a friendship game, really. Friendship is one part of life, but leadership is a much stronger notion over here. So I was just laughing with him, and I said, it's after a month. Right now, I'm very motivated by all this attention I'm getting, and I know I'll be able to do 5 or 6 really good things right now. So you tell me what are the important things to do. But the question that's bothering me right now is after a month, when everybody has forgotten me again, how will I maintain that motivation to keep progress going? Because that's why we're leaders, right? We progress things. And he was actually, and he said that only comes from a sense of mission. And in that moment, something clicked. It's that commitment to that mission that we have, not necessarily a mission that we advertise, not always a mission that is on our company's mission statement, but a personal mission that drives us to wake up the next day and say, yes, I can do this. If I don't do it, who else will do it? This is my mission. This is why I'm here. This is why there is this gap out there, and I know I can fill this gap. Nobody else can do it. Of course, maybe somebody else can do it better than me. Somebody else will do it worse than me. Better or worse don't matter. They can't do what I can do. I am here with my commitment to the next action. Commitment, of course, is to action. I'm not talking about actions right now because we're talking about the principles of leadership. But how you action them in your own lives depends upon your context, what you personally are committed to, and that we can always have a one-to-one discussion about that. That is what coaching is about. Coaches, of course, help their people to move and progress their own personal commitments in very specific ways. Coming to the fifth and the last C of personal leadership, I think it has a lot to do with your core. As I said, this is a journey within. And if we were in a room together, I would have asked us all to go through the traditional breathing exercise. To take a deep breath in and out, and in and out again. And to look at ourselves, not with eyes, but to look within and to look at our core. And to observe how the core often, like a lake in a storm, just goes up and down and up and down and left and right. And then I would ask you to exercise personal leadership and gently calm that lake within. Instruct it to calm down a little bit. It may not have learned to listen to you right now, but instruct it again and again, and soon you will find that your core is a pure, shining lake that reflects everything around it. And when you look at that core, what you will see within it is your own personal truth. You will see your values, what really matters to you. Does truth matter to you? Does progress matter to you? Is it really important to you to keep moving? What matters to you most deeply will be reflected back to you whenever you instruct your inner self to be silent, to be your mirror. It doesn't necessarily, this is a yogic practice also. This is a practice that is taught in many leadership seminars. And this is not necessarily something that other people need to teach you. This is something, and this is not something that needs to take 1 hour, half an hour, 45 minutes of meditation. Every once in a while, when you find yourself with a minute or two, I'm waiting for a phone call. My next phone call is scheduled for 6 p.m. I'm sitting at 5:55. Take a moment. I need to go and pick up my mother in 15 minutes. Take a moment. Still the lake of your soul and watch within. Your core will always signal to you what your power is. And I think that is where your personal leadership will find its power. Because leadership, let us not be shy about it, is an act of power. After all these great and lovely, kind words, I will also be pragmatic about it. Leadership is about purpose, the sense of mission you have. Leadership is about power and how you exercise it for good, I'm hoping. And leadership is about presence. Just like you said a little while ago, Tripti, leadership is about standing there, your presence when everyone else is flailing. Sometimes you just need to be there, and your very presence. Uh, Many of you would have had this experience when you, um, in school, in class, when a teacher walks into the classroom. The sheer presence of the teacher calms the class down and everybody sits down. Is that just socialization, or is it an act of leadership in that moment? In a conference hall, the main speaker walks in. There are 1,000 people in that hall. The main speaker walks in. The chatter in the conference room calms down. Sitting in a boardroom, you're having a discussion about something that really matters to you, a conflict in your organization. Should we take this path or that path? And people are disagreeing. Somebody with strong personal leadership starts talking, even if it is in a very soft tone. Others will listen to them because they are exuding presence. Now, one of the challenges of our COVID era is all of us are in a space that does not include personal presence. So, how do we exude that presence, that power in a way? When we are in a situation where our connection with each other is diluted by the computer screen and with distractions behind us. Enabling that space, enabling that bubble around us, and creating this projection where we reach out to each other, where we are totally connected with each other, is an act of personal leadership. The connection that we form will not happen just because we happen to be connected on the internet. The connection that we form happens because we are consistent in our delivery, we are consistent in building progress. I genuinely care about every one of you who is sitting here in this webinar because I know that once you have found that core, you will be able to find that central shell within yourself, that lake within yourself, and you will be able to power so much greatness. This is primarily a gathering of women, but this goes out to the men in the group too, because we are all gathered here today because we know that we have so much more potential within us than we are able to deliver on right now. Our quest for personal leadership is our quest to be in service of our potential.
Ma'am, I would just, I think I'll take up a quick question because I think Smita ji has raised her hand since a long time. If you allow me, maybe I can take a quick question from
all questions now.
Yes. Smita ji, please.
Oh, thank you. Really beautiful talk, inspiring, very helpful, and something that I need to take a lot of learnings from. My question may be a little irrelevant right now, but what do you do when the environment around you is so politically skewed? You have goals, you know how to go ahead with them, but you know you can't because you know in the current atmosphere, you can't go beyond a point. You can't question authority for one, and you have to go along with everything. How does one navigate you know, reaching one's goals? You know the system is actually against the goals you are pursuing, but you still retain a little sliver of hope that, you know, through sheer perseverance, if not now, in 5 years, in 10 years, something positive will happen. How do you tackle such a situation? And this is quite apart from the learnings that I have to take from what you've said, because there are many of those and which I lack. And so I'll have to think about that. But apart from that, the external environment also is very, very daunting and challenging. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful question. What a beautiful, broad and deep question. The fact
I could relate to it, and I can just add on complimentary question to what Smitaji said. And what if the political part which she's talking about, in addition to that, is also your you being very young at a place where, you don't see anyone of that age? Ma'am, maybe you can answer both questions now, because, one is a political scenario where you're feeling the kind of challenge. And the second is that maybe you understand somewhere that your age is also a factor which is causing a lot of challenge to people around you. So maybe you can answer, ma'am.
That's a whole series. That's a whole series of questions. I would say, one, broadly, there are actually two ways of answering the political part of it. One, we must realize that in the larger scheme of things, politics is like a pendulum. It will swing one way and it then will swing the other way. And for us who want to do good in the world, who want to create a certain impact in the world, it would be a mistake to dwell on the two extremes of the pendulum. Much of the work is going to happen in the transition from one extreme to another extreme of the political spectrum. And so that is the big picture part of it. Coming down with a little bit more granularity. Having realized that the political world is always in a state of change, is always changing, a little bit more granularity, you will see that there is no one mega political view. Even when you say that the political world is, and that could be in a company, that could be just your boss in your team, it could be a country, it could be at any level, it could be within your family as well. Politics is, wherever there are people, there'll be politics. There's no doubt about that. That's we just have to we have to accept that. We have to accept that. So with a little bit more granularity, you will realize that politics is actually an aggregation of personal interests. And the more important part of it, of personal priors. Priors, priors. Everybody, anytime you engage with politics, you are engaging with people. Anytime you're engaging with people, you are not engaging only with their interests, but you're also engaging with their past beliefs and their past learnings. And if you are able to find a hook and a connect and some common ground with any of these things, three parts, you have three components of influence there. You have their interests, so maybe you can find common ground in interests, saying both of us want to work for women entrepreneurship. All of us want to work for gender parity. We find common ground over there, you can work with those people. You find that you have some sort of common interest. For example, there are people I disagree with strongly on saying this is what should happen in the economy. Some believe in liquidity, I believe in the multiplier effect. Different approaches to solving the current economic problem. But that's all right. We are still good friends because we have common ground in agreeing with, say, the amazing concept of the Prahlad and Hiranyakashyap, where there was no obvious solution and you have to find a solution. Where we find, and that doesn't make me a religious person. That person is hugely religious. I'm not. It's just that both of us have happened to have read the same stories. Our common ground is the prior stories that we have read. That person's take from the stories might be completely opposite to mine. Doesn't matter. We have the story. We have common ground to play with. So an act of the worst thing we can do as leaders is to push our opponents into a corner. In fact, the worst thing we can do is to make them opponents. The best thing we can do is gently bring people into common space and common ground. Coming to age, that's a challenge that many of us have faced. And when you have both age and gender, Smita, you also have been in very powerful positions from a very, very early age. There have been, in fact, your generation right now, the young people today, those in their 20s and 30s today, are very fortunate because three things have happened in India. One, demographics. Half of the country is under 25. Look around you. So many CEOs are around 30 to 35 years of age. When we used to walk into a room full of CEOs, they would literally treat us like little children. And to be honest, because my father knew some of them, for example, they would say, somebody's daughter has come, beta, come. And I'm like, I'm not beta here. I am an equal professional here, and I have been invited to the same table because of my professional qualifications and abilities. So why should I be relegated to the beta/intern level? That's not who I am. Just because of chronology, that's not who I am. And that's not the conversation we're going to have. That is not the relationship between us in this room. And so there's, for those of you who are into HR and would like to look up a theory, there's a beautiful theory called transactional analysis, where they say that there are 3 states of being: parent, adult, and child. And the ideal conversation, I'm not going to go through the whole theory, the ideal conversation is between 2 adults, where you can have a mature conversation and you can have an adult to adult conversation. You don't need to patronize them as a child. You don't need to look up to them as a parent. You need to have a very straightforward conversation where you're granting each other equal respect. There's much more complexity to the theory, of course, but that is never given to us, is it, in a room? It is never given to us. We have to step up. And remember the C called consistency. We have to consistently deliver to that. So there was a very interesting example. I was talking to a friend who talks to CXOs all the time right now, CEO groups, etc. And he was saying, I've noticed that how most of the men land up to these Zoom meetings in t-shirts, but the women are always very well dressed. And I said, right. So I obviously had to, respond to that, saying, do you understand why women have to make that extra effort even now? Women have to make that extra effort even now, because if we slip up on consistency, we will be pushed back again. There is nothing that we can do that detracts from us stepping up and saying, I am a leader here. And I own this conversation. I own this topic. I know it better than anyone else. And I own this room. We will have a conversation about it. Please challenge me because I know I have the answers. Did you see that internal confidence in that tone out there? Calm confidence. I'm not going to shriek. I'm not going to fight. I'm not going to shout. I'm not going to interrupt. But I will have my say. And I will be heard. In order to be heard, again, remember, everything doesn't always happen in the main meeting room. But an act of leadership is always demonstrated in large meeting rooms, always. I'm not sure if I've answered all parts of the question, but I think I've answered 3 out of 7 parts.
Ma'am, you've answered beautifully. And I think after listening to you, I am everything you say, I could think of a counter question, but I know we have a very limited time, and I would take up the second question from Simi Puri. I'll request whoever is raising hand to first switch on the video and then raise the hand. That would be really appreciable. Thank you, Simi.
So Meeta, amazing insights, care, consistency, community commitment, and core. I have not seen this aspect, maybe experienced it, but I think it's one of the most beautiful things. So what you're trying to say is, which is something I want to really learn, is that when there is a turmoil as a leader, it's always better to first calm your inner core, and that's when you get the answers. And that's where the perseverance kind of happens. Do you do very often? Do you do this exercise? You said very often, because there's a lot of time when I act very impulsively, and I would really need to know if this would help.
I think impulsive action is also all right, but impulsive action always has to come from a still core and cognition.
Okay.
So impulsive action cannot be a reaction. It has to be a cognitive response to the situation. So again, the easiest way to demonstrate that is when you think of a mother and child situation. Or for those of us who are not parents, when you have a nephew or a niece that's visiting, it's the easiest way to demonstrate this. Suppose you have a child who's whining and crying or whatever and really genuinely troubling you. Do you react in anger and say, get away, or quickly slap the child or shout at the child? Or do you take a quick moment, it doesn't take more than half a second, to take control of yourself first and say, this is me, that's you, I'm the grown up here, you're the one who's out of control. Now, how do we handle the situation? And then respond to the situation as is appropriate. The same thing happens in the corporate world. When, for example, you have a sudden crisis. A classic movie example, fire in a factory. I'm not going to real life examples here. And that's a genuine crisis. Now, a genuine crisis is actually the time when you really need all your resources and all your senses and all your cognitive abilities on call. Why would you want to disrupt your internal resources with your own internal turmoil?
Yeah.
If you have practiced this, you will take that moment. And again, there are tools and processes to get to that also, and we can have another conversation on that. But take a moment, still yourself. And then you are in a position of control and power. And then you know any decision that you take would have, it doesn't have to be the right decision, but it would have no regrets and no guilt. Because you did the best you can with the information you had at that point of time. You were not troubled, you were not angry, you did not disrupt yourself, you did not sabotage yourself.
Yeah.
The act of internal turmoil is an act of self-sabotage. And we were never trained out of it.
Yep, that helps.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Simi. Anyone else who would like to raise any question, please raise your hands. In the meanwhile, I think, ma'am, I would like to quickly ask you a question. When as a leader, you're managing community or you're managing, like you have a team of employees and you are someone who is giving a lot of multi commands to the same person or to many person. How can we be more effective? What should be our, what should be our strategy for ourselves too? Because when you're leading things and you are multitasking, you are leading community, the kind of questions or the kind of the way people approach you are extremely different. They're diverse. It's not that you have just one set of answer for all of it. You have to be as quick as the questions they raise. So what do you suggest for that kind of scenario? How to keep yourself all energized and same as you are?
So the answer to that is, first, at one level, is very, very operational, very basic. Make sure that you are hyper organized. And I myself used to be hyper organized at one point of time, and I know I have lost it and I have to go back to that again. So for each of us, if we are not perfect in these, that's okay. It's a journey. It's not, and even if you have achieved it once, you will lose it and it will come back. Trust yourself. So one is trust yourself. Two is being hyper organized, which means take notes. The most successful people I have known, the most multi-talented, multilateral, Simi, we have a common friend who demonstrates this across communities. And those people are very, very organized. There is great clarity in their minds of the strands that they are handling. There is also, and this is very difficult for the younger ones amongst us, there is also great clarity in what I will handle and what I will not handle. The younger you are, of course, your job is to increase the scope of what you're doing. The older you are, you decrease the scope of what you're doing. So as you grow older, of course, it becomes easier to say no. You know what's working for you, you know what's not working for you. But if you're younger, that's indeed a challenge because, like you said, there's going to be so many different types of people and so many different types of, not just opportunities, but types of opportunities, types of platforms, types of businesses. And there I would refer to the first C of personal leadership: care. If you respond to everything because you care for it, your response will always be professional. The degree of commitment you have is something you actually need to sit and think through every once in a while, saying, this is my portfolio now. For those of us who have very dynamic portfolios, some of us actually sit down and write out that list every night. At the operational level, it's called a to-do list. For some people, it's a simple to-do list. For some of us, it says, these are the 17 projects that are important for the next 24 hours, for the next 1 week, for the next quarter. These are the ones that I commit to, and these are the ones that I will only engage with. The 5 C's of personal leadership, check them off against everything that you have to do. And you will find that your responses are consistent and professional and do not create dissonance in your projects. Because inconsistency is going to create dissonance. The inability to respond in exactly the right manner is going to create that dissonance. And that dissonance is what we are trying to avoid over here, where you say we want this assonance and we want this resonance so that other people are enabled and empowered to go forth and do what they need to do. There's a project that you and I are working on right now, Tripti, where we haven't reached that, either the assonance or the resonance yet. But it's okay, that's a phase of that project. We know that we are building towards that common ground because we've been able to build care, we've been able to build community, we have been able to build consistency, we have been able to establish commitment. What we have not been able to establish yet is that the core. And that's okay. That's part of the journey. We're working towards it. And once that core is established, we know that even in the project that seems to be troublesome, we will be able to respond in productive ways.
Sure, ma'am. I think we have another question from Smitaji. Smitaji, please.
Thank you. Yeah. So Meeta, again, I think I'm asking a question which is an extension of my earlier question. You gave a strategy as to how to engage people, who don't agree with you, find a common, find some common ground, etc. But what if you are talking to tone deaf people who are not rational, who have their own agenda, basically either to stay in power, to continue enjoying whatever they're enjoying without doing any good to the country? So how do you proceed there? Don't you have the right to be frustrated? I agree with you, it's self-sabotage, but how do you proceed in such a situation? How do you get them in that same box?
So that's actually an advocacy question. That's not necessarily a leadership question. That is a question about advocacy strategy. And advocacy is a whole other.
Sure.
I said that's an advocacy question.
Okay.
Can others hear me? Yeah. Others can hear me, Smita. So I think that's something to do with your machine. When you notice that when people have, one of the challenges of today's society is the extreme positions that people take, where factions are just unwilling to listen to each other. We have a paucity of listening spaces. And this is where, so when you're up against somebody who just will not listen, you have to figure out why they will not listen. If their own personal interests are so strong, there is no way you are going to go. Let's remember one thing in life: we cannot change other people. We can change ourselves. We can change our communication. We can change our way of approaching them. And when we communicate, the purpose of communication is the response we get. So by changing our communication, we can change their response to the little sliver, the tiny little bit of agreement that we think we can hook them onto. Now, that's an advocacy question. That's an advocacy strategy that works in extreme cases where you say salami tactics, as they said in Yes Minister, right? One step at a time, one tiny step at a time. But it's you as the leader of your personal mission to know that you cannot. I mean, when we eat a pizza, we see a giant 12-inch pizza. Do we stuff the entire pizza into our mouth? No, we don't. We slice it up into smaller slices and we have that one by one. It's exactly the same thing. We need to have a very clear idea of our sequence of yeses that we can. For example, never let them say no. One of the rules of great advocacy is never let the other person say no to you. Tripti, you would know that from your various negotiations, that when you go in to a meeting, you know you will only ask the questions to which you will get a yes. I have watched you work with great finesse in meetings. You will not even ask the questions to which somebody is going to say no. That's a very, very useful technique. That is an act of leadership, personally, internally, because you're controlling yourself and not blurting out the entire thing because the other person doesn't have the capacity. Your job is to listen out for their capacity to understand and deliver. So only ask them that much at that time. But your job as a leader for your personal commitment is also to understand the sequence of steps, whether they're 1,000 steps, it doesn't matter. Everything doesn't happen in 2 or 3 steps. And some steps may have to be repeated. The game of snakes and ladders was actually invented to teach advocacy in life, by the way. The game of snakes and ladders was invented to teach us that sometimes we will find opportunities and sometimes we will just slither down and have to start all over again.
That's true. I mean, Sid, I really like what you shared about your experience, and it's you. I would say it's being very modest. You share that that going on screen, and you become. Everyone goes through it. Getting those popularity, and then there is a time when you definitely will see that either you don't feel like going on that route, or you may not be approached for that route anymore. So I really feel that part is so important to understand. It's not just about celebrities, but even our city heroes and people who are experts in different domains have also gone through the same route. And what are your few tips to those people who have seen it, who are going through it? And I can also include one very important part is also your people who are working with you. They may also start seeing you as competition after some time.
Sure.
May consider you, and you may not even realize who that person is. So, what do you suggest to leaders who, how to go about these scenarios where you see people? Of course, the first part is where you have achieved a lot of popularity, and then you just either you don't want to go on the same route or you're not being approached for the same route, and also a scenario where someone just next to you who built with you, who spent the whole time building a project with you, is no more the same you thought of. How to deal with this circumstances? I think in case anyone other than me has any other questions, please raise your hands, and we would take them. Meeta ma'am.
First, trust yourself. Totally trust yourself. You know what you know, and you know what you don't know. So those who have, and this is something we see in public life very often, people who used to be very popular, and popularity is a very shallow game. It's a very easy and shallow game. Anybody can play it. I mean, I can go on Twitter today and just pick a fight with a celebrity, and suddenly I'll have 10,000 more followers. It's a silly, stupid game. Nobody should really play for the popularity game. You're going for something much deeper than that over here. And for that, you have to have trust in yourself. And then you have to demonstrate the trust that you have in yourself with the work that you do and you create. If it's your domain, then and that means you own that domain, right? Which means even if other people don't call you to do that, you can always create something that is meaningful. And the minute you demonstrate meaning, everybody rushes towards a solution. They see that you have a solution. I actually had a very interesting experience in which is this the main government conference center in Delhi.
Constitution of India?
No, the building.
Ambedkar?
No, where all the government things happen.
Gyan Bhavan.
Udyog Bhavan? Okay.
No, Vigyan Bhavan. So I was invited to a ceremony, something there for my views, and a senior bureaucrat who'd retired, who obviously used to be given a lot of attention because of their position, and it doesn't always necessarily get that attention anymore, turned around and asked me, "But why have they called you here?" Now, I personally have always rejected titles. Nobody knows me as CEO of this or committee member of that or author of this or author of that. I have done all of those things. I've built organizations, I've been on committees, I've given advice, I've been on boards, I've done all of those things. Uh, I mean, there's pretty much no box that has not been ticked other than, say, film acting, maybe. But everything else has pretty much been ticked. But I don't need to demonstrate that for me to be invited to that forum. Because of my ability to demonstrate personal leadership, I will step up and I will show them, showcase what I can do for you and to progress you as an industry, as a sector. I will step up and showcase that. So what if the next person out there is stealing an idea? How can you steal an idea that I give away for free anyway? Now, personal politics will exist. Of course, they will exist. But there is nothing to steal because I have already handed it out. That is the role of somebody who is so confident in their leadership. And this is the important part, the one I'm about to say now. You need to trust yourself and you need to be able to be confident in your leadership. Because if you're not confident of that, you will start getting desperate for attention. And there is no stink worse than desperation.
Truly said, ma'am. That's so true. And with this, we have a question from Miss Jyoti Rani. Ma'am, please ask. Jyoti ji, you will have to unmute yourself. Can you please unmute yourself? Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, Meeta ma'am, it was a nice talk. Just had one question. Basically, it usually comes back every time. As you said, if you are super organized and you are super efficient, so you always have a competition. You're like, people don't want to kind of, upgrade you, or they want to kind of pull you down. Especially your seniors. Basically, I face with my seniors because they don't want to listen because they have that, the conventional mindset. So if you have a good idea, they don't want to appreciate you and encourage you. So what we need to do about it, ma'am?
Your best friend is documentation.
Okay.
Your best friend is documentation at this stage, but there are so many other things to do also. What you say is sadly, it's a very typical situation. Especially for women, we find it very difficult to be heard. You say one thing, and the man sitting next to you says the same thing. It is possible that that person will be heard. So one solution
Yes.
is to find friends. You have to find friends who will be your supporters. That is the C of community, remember, for personal leadership. You have to find your community within this group, the 2 or 3 people who will back you up. So I think in Obama's cabinet, they had this rule that, and the women in the cabinet actually decided this. They said if one woman says something and she's not heard, another person will turn around and say, just as this lady has said, and repeat that so that the credit goes to that lady. That doesn't have to be a woman. Any ally can do that in the meeting. Any ally can do that in the meeting. Also, we had so you must build allies. In your team, you have to work hard to build allies. So one, documentation so that it is very obvious to everybody that you have done the work. Your documentation must be made visible. You have to have an email trail, for example, that says the first email came from you. At least in your annual appraisal, you will be able to put that up, if not always. Sometimes people will get irritated with that, but it's there. Then secondly, having allies. Allies will work in big meetings and allies will work in creating support networks outside of meetings also. They will then turn around and say, but she did the work over there. Thirdly, we had this story, a children's story. I love the Panchatantra because it teaches us a lot about leadership. And I think it's from the Panchatantra or the Jatak tales where there's a story where they say the Billy, the cat is asked by the tiger and the lion by the tiger to train. So they say, Billy Masi, please teach us all that you know. So Billy teaches them how to stalk. Billy teaches them how to catch their prey. Billy teaches them how to do many, many other things. And then suddenly, and once they say, okay, thank you very much for your lessons, Billy Masi. And suddenly the tiger turns around in this story, turns around and wants to eat the cat. And the cat quickly jumps up on the tree. And the tiger says, but you didn't teach me this. And the Billy says, I am not such a fool that I'll teach you everything that I know. So always save some horsepower, save some of your gunpowder and keep it dry so that in a public situation, you are able to demonstrate that you own the idea and you did all the work. Not saying I did it, not you don't have to say it. You have to show it. You have to show, not tell. Because if you say, no, it was my idea, everybody will say, no, this is a silly attention seeker. You don't want to be that person. But if there is a question on the table and nobody else can answer the question, and only you can answer the question because you did the work on it actually, then you have succeeded in demonstrating personal leadership of that matter. So demonstrate it again and again and again. You will be heard.
I also feel, Meeta ma'am, there could be circumstances where you have done some work, and we as Indian, I would say, have a habit of sharing or talking about it so much before coming to a conclusion. Is also somewhere, we should take a note of that. I mean, we may conclude the project later, but we'll talk about it much in advance. And 10 people talking about the same thing without mentioning your name. So I think we also play a very important role in how things are around us. But a very I think it's a very great feedback for all of us to create allies. I instead as a community leader, it is very important because I've seen when there is a problem for an individual woman or individual person of a particular thing, but if we go as a community with the same thing as 10 or 15, it get hurt. It easily gets hurt. So I really feel one aspect is to create allies and, get supported. And the other is to definitely find out people who are facing the same challenge, if it's a challenge. So, and you will find people around you because you're not the first woman in that job. You're not the first lady in the group. There are more people around you, must be there, who have faced the same, must have survived it. And I would say it helps. It helps a lot if you can find out who have survived it in that particular group. Yeah.
One thing that women do not do very well, and this is something that we are trying to repair as Women Innovator and in other groups, is mentoring other women. So hopefully sessions, we men know how to ask each other these questions. We've not figured out how to ask each other these questions. So Jyoti, your question was so beautiful and so perfect because this is what we should be asking other women. Otherwise, how will each of us know that this situation is happening with others? We will feel lost and alone. And how will we be able to share solutions saying, oh, this worked for me, this worked for me, this worked for me? And then try it out in our different contexts. So thank you so much for that question.
We have a next question, ma'am. We have a question from Buddha Burman. If you can switch on your video and unmute and speak, otherwise I can take up the question. Okay. Ma'am, the question is, what do you think of creating a personal brand image in this digital world?
Absolutely. Personal branding is the only way to make yourself visible. And personal branding comes from many roots. One, I mean, think of everything that you would do for a product as a brand. you would need to do all the same thing, all of those things for yourself as a personal brand. You will need to understand what are you as a product, for example. It sounds brutal to call a person a product, but we're just trying to understand it in that terminology, that's all. So what is it that you deliver? What is the value that you create in the room? Now, some parts of value are understood better by your market. For example, if you are very good at writing decks and creating PPTs, everybody will understand that you're really good. Or if you're very good at making sure that all the accounts are done on time, everybody, those are more visible bits. If you've been able to drive sales from and make it 10 times what it was before, that's very visible. But there are so many other invisible parts of value that you will not be able to demonstrate. For example, if you happen to be the person who always asks the right question in a meeting, and then other people are able to solve it because you ask the right question, that is not something your market is going to understand and value. So, should that be part of your personal branding? Not necessarily. I think that is something that you can appreciate in yourself, but it is not something that you want to project to others. It is something you should maintain, and at a certain level of leadership, you will be able to bring it as part of your personal branding, but not always. So, first, understand what is the visible value that you are delivering. So, if you remember the classic 4 Ps of marketing, where you have product, place. In terms of leadership, it is about presence. Where are you present? Where are you visible? As a personal brand, you need to make yourself visible. You do need to promote yourself a little bit. In our C's of leadership, we talked about consistency. Dress in a specific way. For example, I mean, think of any corporate leader or any political leader. Every one of them has one specific way of dressing. They don't quickly change between types of dresses, because that makes them instantly recognizable as a brand. The dress is their brand logo. For women, it is very, very, and so this is not just about, this is about things that we call deep, things that we call shallow, but we have to understand the entire gamut of that. For example, a friend of mine, Dipali Nair, who is now running a very large, she's the CMO of Chief Marketing Officer of IBM in India and South Asia. When she's been running a lot of webinars in these 2 months. Now, very interestingly, a part of her personal branding has become the silver earrings. Now, she and I, as personal friends, we've been talking about those silver earrings, or I've been following her on Pinterest, and I've been watching her interest in jewelry for at least 7 to 8 years. For 7 to 8 years, she's been working on her solid marketing skills. You deliver professionally. If you have a bad product, nobody's going to want you anyway. You deliver professionally. But when it comes time for projection and promotion of yourself, even the little things will add to your brand image. So both depth and shallow, every little bit must add to that. Read any good book on marketing, read the 4 Ps and the 7 Ps of marketing, and think of it as it applies to you. That's the fastest way to get to a solution.
Thank you so much.
Oh, hi.
Yep. Thank you. I think it was already enlightenment, like how to create personal brand image in this digital world, because everybody's busy in creating product pages or websites. But what I understood during this pandemic, COVID, during this lockdown period, a personal image is very important, because then only you will able to connect the people virtually. Otherwise, nobody will be able to relate with you.
Absolutely. As you know, they say your brand is not what people see when you're in the room. Your brand is what they say when you're not in the room. And now, in times of COVID, nobody is in the same room. So your personal branding is so much more important.
Right.
Yeah, I think I'll just add, ma'am,
Thank you.
that I think someone who's professional and talking, it's about digital, in digital world. If you're technically strong, writing blogs definitely helps. Writing blogs, creating those LinkedIn articles. Slowly, I've seen even youngsters are able to create that kind of audience for themselves. And I'm sure someone who's technically strong on regular basis, things can definitely change in the digital times. And with this, I have a question, ma'am. I've seen, and this is my personal observation, that a lot of people who are from the finance field at the moment in the seminar, I've come across one important observation is when we have technically strong people, we have seen they are less on publicizing it and, on media, and the people who are talking a lot are hardly strong in technical. Now, what I feel is a challenge to be technically strong and being talking on media. It's not easy. So, what do you suggest to people listening? I mean, obviously there is a need for people who are technically strong. I have experienced a time where I was in a media room, and it's one of the very famous TV channel. And when I spoke to people who were going on the screen, most of them were hardly knowing anything about tax, but they were going on TV to talk about it. So I don't know if we can bring a change to it, but what do you suggest? How do people who are technically strong come out of their shells, or what should they do? Like we say, as a professional, you should keep reading. I think as a professional, what else would you suggest who is really technically strong to keep doing?
So let's acknowledge very, very clearly that technical skills and communication skills are two very different types of skills. The fact that you know something to a great deal of depth doesn't matter to anybody on media unless you are able to create a fantastic soundbite out of it. The value of technical knowledge is much, much greater in technical and professional spaces, but in media spaces, your technical knowledge does not have as much value as your ability to communicate. They are in a different business from you. And if you want to play in both businesses, then you have to have both sets of skills. Not just your technical ability, but definitely your ability to do three things. One, simplify the idea. Two, say it in a way that the audience understands it. And three, don't be greedy about demonstrating everything that you know. Because any mass media, even today's seminar, we have not gone into any level of depth about leadership and its operational parameters. Why? Because even in a webinar like this, it is not possible to communicate anything that is more complex than this. We pretty much touched the level of complexity that is possible in a multi-way broadcast. Anything deeper than this, anything more complex than this, we would have lost our community. Every one of us would not have been able to participate. And inclusion is really, really important to communication. So people who do have technical knowledge and do want to share this technical knowledge will need to invest in building those communication skills that reach across. I'm going to take the example of McDonald's. McDonald's is, of course, capable of delivering 5,000 dishes in each of its outlets, is it not? Yet it simplifies itself to create replication and resonance across the globe. It has three very clear messages. You're going to get basic food, the food is going to be hygienic, and the place is going to be safe and clean. The place is going to be clean. Three simple messages that McDonald's gives out consistently. Now that's great communication. Each of us as an individual needs to stop being greedy and needs to stop showing off how much we know, especially if we know more. It's okay to say only one thing in one meeting, no more than that. A maximum of three, definitely not more than 3 points. So we have to build the various abilities before we can build the opportunities for this kind of projection. It's up to the technical folk.
Thank you. I think thank you so much, ma'am, for this. I think in case anyone has a question, otherwise we can bring the session to an end. And thank you so much. I'm just waiting for anyone to raise hand. So I think I can bring this session to an end. And thank you so much, Meeta ma'am. It's as you said, this is something which needs a lot of discussion, but we hardly understand the importance of these small discussions. And thank you once again for being with us today. Meeta, you want to? Okay.
I have learned so much. I'm so grateful to you, Meeta ma'am, that I've attended this. Thank you, Tripti. You really take the effort of sending us all. I don't know how many people you have on your personal mailing list that you send each one of us reminders just before it is starting that we're going live now. Thank you, Dil Se, to you and to Meeta ma'am. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Would love to have more of such sessions if you can make time for us, Meeta ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Manmeet. Thank you so
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Meeta.
everyone, for joining us today.
Love.